Hey all, Game Methuselah. Wanted to do another short video because a lot of people at my last video are asking me about, these old miniatures I found, how I sort of find them. Seems like I'm very lucky at that. Um, and they wanted to see some of them and maybe go over a few of these things. Also, yesterday, as I mentioned on my Twitter feed, I had a painter show up down there because I had sort of called an open house and I wanted to, have people maybe come down, check out the figures, check out the games and stuff. But, I understand life is busy and people don't have time. But what was really cool is a guy, an old vintage painter, came down. He had some stuff. I think he was looking to unload. Still is, I think. So maybe if you guys are interested down the road. But I did a little few pictures of that on my Twitter feed. And it's interesting to look at. But people wanted to see some of the figures I got at the con. I'll also show you some of the figures I bought from this gentleman who came down last night. And it's really kind of interesting. And I think this is a way to sort of build the vintage hobby. More importantly, what I want to do is talk to you about something I want to work on in the future, which is the idea of getting the vintage miniatures that people have in the hands of really fabulous artists who can do them justice, not necessarily repainting them, but getting the ones that weren't painted or were painted so badly they have to essentially be stripped and redone, but get them to repaint them beautifully. And my sort of goal here and things I'm thinking about, and believe me, if you're out there and you have some ideas, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe people are already doing this, but I'd love to get it where we'll send you 2 or 3 vintage 70s, early 80s figures, have the artist paint them at their leisure, and then give us one of them back. And the idea with the one of them is to basically find a way to put it up to auction, because most people treat these as toy soldiers. And they are, and I mean, I do too. And mostly your tabletop games are like that. But some of the stuff that gets produced out there, some of the miniatures I've seen over the years, it's real art. And the thing about real art is it needs to be seen, it needs to be out there, and it needs to be looked at as the historical record of the hobby, or in any case of historical type things, what the society was like at the period of time. And I don't deem myself great enough, even though I have a golden demon and I can make really beautiful work, at least I could 20 or 30 years ago when I had better eyes. It's important to get art seen as, well, art. And that's where I want to get people out there, and so I can get their figures recognized. Maybe their figures can then be put up for auction, and this is what I'm all pondering about, so I'd love input on what you guys think. The figures sold at auction could be given to charity work to help maybe ease suffering or, help out people who are in need. Plus, the other thing about it is, this is all art, and it will be remembered in the future as art. So it needs to be treated as art. And if you're a fabulous painter, or you know a fabulous painter who might be interested in doing something like this with me, or you know people out there who are thinking about doing something like this, or building a museum, all the things we've pondered about with my friends and I who have large collections of art, get back to me on this. And maybe you can get the artists in touch with me if I don't already know them, because I really want to see a real large collection of vintage figures which people like being painted by fabulous artists, people who are more fabulous than me, and get it out so you guys can see it, and more importantly then have it be put up for auction and things like that. Because the longer I look at my miniatures, I realize I don't want to take them to the grave with me. I want to have them use some good and get in the hands of people who will love and use them beyond me. Years ago, I worked at the Long Beach Youth Home as a charity organization to help troubled children get back on their feet. And this guy had a fabulous home. He was a fairly wealthy lawyer. And he had collected what was called sort of second-tier art, which was sort of like great artists for some reason never became as famous as the Grand Masters. And there was a situation where there was one artist who was tremendous. The Grand Masters used to come to him to learn his secrets. And it was like, why is his art not well known? Well, he went blind at 28 years of age. So he never produced the large volume of art to get him famous enough in the art community to be recognized as a great artist. And there's a lot of things about how art is sold and how it's valued. That's an interesting separate story, but maybe we'll do that down the road. But my point is, I really would like to get the art community out there. Like Mike Mordor or Goblins of Mordor. He said he never had a chance to have any of the 70s miniatures. So I sent him a bunch of unpainted 70s figs I had to hopefully get the idea that he'd paint them, maybe send me one back, so I'd have it, and then have them all for himself, which I thought would be great. But more importantly, now I feel it's not so much having it for me, It's having it to do something with it, to do some good with it, maybe work with the art. And that's what's important. Because when I went to this guy's house and we found all this art and we were looking at it, and my mother-in-law, Mia, and I were looking at this one piece that we both loved, and he walked up to talk to us, and I asked him a question. I said, "It must be fabulous to own all this great art." And he says, "I don't own any of this." He says, "I'm just the current caretaker." He says, "I only have the opportunity to have all this art and be able to caretake it and pass it on down the road because 7 other families before me bought, cared for it, took care of it, preserved it, and made it available for the future." And that's what's important in art. We are very short-lived on this planet. And the people who have great skills and great talents and utilize those for benefits need to be remembered into the future. If you go to most museums and look around, you're going to see that no one remembers who the greatest corrugated box salesman in the world was, or anything else, but art and religion and, unfortunately, warfare. Those tend to be things that get remembered. And I like the fact that art is amongst that. And I'd love to get more people out there who's in this community producing great art, owned by people out there of who they are, so they can sell their art and make money. If you can't make any living doing your art, obviously you're going to end up having to do something else that isn't related, which is what I did. I mean, I never made any money on my art, so I made money doing box sales. It just tends to be the way life is. But things for you artists out there who are producing art, and I said this to Mike Mordor, if you do a piece of art, sign your art. Make sure in the future people will be able to at least cyberstalk you and figure out who you were and how that art relates. My friend Steve was a fabulous artist. At the end, he signed all his art, which I really liked. But if you're out there and you're doing art, sign your art. So I've droned on too long here, so I'm going to go ahead and show you some of these miniatures I picked up both at the convention and yesterday at the HMGS PSW Game Clubhouse where this guy came out, and you can appreciate it. So if you're not interested in the minis and the art, go now. It'll only get boring from here on. I'll talk to you soon. Game on. Okay, for those who asked to see sort of the old vintage figures that I have picked up over the last couple weeks, this is the collection that came from the con. Not the complete collection, but the vast majority of things that are really worthwhile. So we'll go ahead and start. The one thing I love is Greebly. This guy, as you can see over here, had some of the cool stuff, the little chests, which I really liked. He even had dead bodies, door, this little spore pile. This stuff's really neat to add to your game. I really enjoy it. You guys have obviously seen I have a ton of Greebly. The collection looks like someone who got into the game more likely the really late 70s. Maybe early 80s, and maybe he picked it up, stuff that was already blistered up and been sitting on the shelves for a while. But my guess is, like I said, late 70s. So he has things that you would expect to see. Some of the earlier or late 70s Ralph Partha, and things like that. Something very unique here and kind of rare. These here, this is a dwarf and this little white or undead leader. These are Citadel Games Workshop figures, pre-slaughter base from like 1980. This dwarf here was one of my particular favorites with a crossbow. You didn't see a lot of dwarven crossbows early on, and the ones that were kind of boring. This one was really, really beautiful. He's got a shield on the back, nice pose, nice gear. Sculpting was beautiful. This white undead is really beautiful. Really, though, love this dwarf. I love it so much that my friend Steve did. I think I got like maybe 20 of them. All together. Steve got a bunch, I got a bunch. We all painted them up. And I used them in my Warhammer Fantasy game for my Dwarven army. And they're really, really, really beautiful. But I really like them as fantasy figures for characters because they're really unique. And this big shield it has on the back is really nice because it's flat with nothing on it. So it allows you to paint on whatever sort of emblem and things you would like to have. And that was really, really neat. All kinds of different other figures you see. This little set of these 2 little demons was part of a company I do not recall, but they made a box set of about, I don't know, it was 8 or 10 little demons. Of course, I have the set. I have these 2 figures as well. They're really kind of interesting. There weren't a whole lot of demons back then, so anything that could add to that was really cool. He had a really nice little character figure of a wizard, which I think he must have painted for someone himself or one of his players. Was really cool. Grenadier back here. This is Grenadier Etten. Not great. I believe these are Grenadier Angel. I'm not sure what these demons. I think they're Grenadier, but the quality was not as great. I wasn't a huge fan of Grenadier, even though I did have quite a bit. But really, as I got older, I realized it really wasn't so much the company as the sculptors. Because again, this is art, and the art is really based upon who makes it. Now, things to see that are kind of additionally very cool, and I wanted to point out. This figure here, I think, is an archive. I can't remember for sure, but I'm reasonably sure it was an archive figure. When I purchased this, not this figure, of course, but one of my very own, and I have one by me, one by Steve. This likely was the most expensive individual figure I had purchased up to that point. And, that was kind of interesting to me to look at this. I mean, when I bought it, I can completely remember it was like I was aghast how expensive it was. And I won't even tell you how cheap that means. Grenadier again, Mind Flayer. Actually not a bad Mind Flayer. Again, going back to the concept of the sculptors, that really is the big thing. Certain miniatures, in Grenadier figures, I really, really love. Some of their dragons were beautiful. Their lizard men I thought were very cool. There were just so many things they made that were really interesting. And at the time, even though they may, by modern standards, be not so perfect, they were really, really excellent. And the lizard men from Grenadier, I still use. Even though I have a lot of Games Workshop lizard men, which are really stunning, I really, really like the old lizard men by Grenadier. Another thing with Grenadier, this little female figure here, not really great per se, but the thing about her is there wasn't a lot of female clerics. And this obviously looks like a clerical character. She's got the standard D&D hammer or mace, shield, armor, and and of course, not naked. Really, really good. This little barbarian here, Morley Raupartha, not a bad figure, but again, I got kind of tired, even right from the beginning, of having figures that female fighters that just didn't have any clothes on. And it's fine for barbarians, but not so bueno. When you want to basically be, showing a medieval style hero, cleric, things like that. So often I would tie these naked figures, sand off the nibs and then paint them as if they're dressed. I appreciated that more. I liked that better in the game, and it was obviously more useful for the characters I had. Nice big fighter fig, not sure, could be GW, but I can't tell. I believe this was one of the red box when Grenadier started getting some of the better sculptors that they were picking up and getting better figures. And this barbarian's pretty nice. I have this one also, but it's a nice figure, and it's mostly done. So likely I'll clean up some of these, but when I pick up figures, and as I've been obviously talked to you earlier on, I really like to get them sometimes in the hands of other people who might want to paint them. It's kind of like my standard deal is, if you will paint me an old vintage figure, I'll give you 3 old vintage figures, and you paint 3 of them and send me 1, and make sure, of course, you mount and sign it, because this is art. I'd like to have painted stuff from people who are artists, and there are some beautiful artists out there. Now, this is what I picked up yesterday. Now, this is a guy who came down. I had put this in my Twitter feed. One of those hobby shops locally said, I have these miniatures. I've got a bunch of them. I'd like to get rid of them because I've had them sitting in my closet, not using them. And he came down, looking to get some advice from us. So really, we advised him on, what's the best way to try to maximize his price, like on eBay or any of the other sites. But he was looking to get rid of some stuff. So I thought, well, you know what, heck, I could use some of these things. So again, I was looking for things that I was interested in or didn't have or was sort of vintage. Now, this looks like another Grenadier Jin. I didn't have this. Now, I don't remember it, but I'm sure it came out of the box sets. But again, not a bad paint job, not necessarily up to my standard for the time, but considering when it was painted, and I imagine he was just kind of getting into it a little less than, or he had just been getting into the hobby. It's a reasonably nice job. And what I like, and I think you guys heard said, I don't repaint someone else's miniature. I might clean it up and fix it up. And in this case, I would be inclined to do that, especially since kind of he missed a nib. This is one of my pet peeves. When you're cleaning up your figures, I always like it when you make sure you clean all the excess flash off so that they'll be perfect. But, in this case, I'll likely just leave it alone. I'll more like just magnetize it. And because it's Grenadier, I might put it in my vintage box. So I'll have a Jin for if I want to play D&D 0. One of my friends has kindly conned me into getting into Dungeon Crawl Classics. And I think that's going to be kind of fun. I generated up some characters, so we'll see how that goes. Another Grenadier, of course, I think you guys might have seen this in one of my little painting videos. This is a little air elemental. I already painted one of these, not recently, that I had picked up that was, unpainted. So now I have two. This is, I think, Grenadier, nice lizard snake man. This, I believe, is Ralpartha. And what he did was nice, and I think this is really kind of cool, is he mounted them on a clear latex piece and buried it in. So you could actually flip it over and see the box. And this is indeed a Ralpartha figure from, I think, the 90s. And it's a Cyclops, and Cyclopses are kind of cool. So I thought, well, I don't have the figure. Again, if I was not happy with, this figure, I would give it a wash, clean it up, maybe change the flocking, not necessarily my favorite, but I did like his base, and likely what I'll do is I'll just magnetize it and leave it alone. I don't think I'm going to redo any ink wash or anything on it to give it a little bit more detail. I don't know, I may. But really, mostly when I'm looking at art, I like to leave it the way it is. Now, the piece that I was going to get no matter what was this one. This is a late 90s little Drake by Ralpartha. I had not seen it before, most likely because being late 90s, that is almost like a modern figure to me. And I really like it. I thought it was a beautiful little figure. I liked his paint job. Everything about this little figure I enjoyed. So this was more like a little favorite. And, I got all 5 of these figures for $20, which likely was more than I would have wanted to pay if I was, getting them for myself, because, I don't need more minis. But again, I tend to accumulate them just because I so much love the figure. Anyway, nice thing to do. And the other thing too is I wanted to get the guy going. He said he wanted to part with some stuff. I thought, I said you can get more for him, I think. If you go back and look at my Twitter feed and look at like the Shadowrun figures he brought in, I thought, man, if you're playing Shadowrun, he had a set of 12 figures that I think would just put you right up and able to play the game. He'd have characters for everybody. So even if you don't paint, it's a nice little deal. Now, I've got lots and lots more unpainted old figures, and we're starting to talk about where I want to go with this. But I wanted you just to see this, and kind of the reason is that people were asking about it. They wanted to see what I was picking up. Again, sum total of everything here was more likely about $50, painted figs and rare figures. Now, that may be above, obviously, some people's budget, but the thing about it is when people are asking me about vintage old figures, understand, the reason you can't find them much anymore is there just weren't that many of them made. The other reason is like these figures over here, when I saw them at the con, I passed by this guy's booth more than likely for 2 hours. He was there at the swap meet. He had obviously trying to get rid of his stuff. He had, even at this late date, a lot of really cool Ralpartha late 70s ogres and trolls. Really neat. He had put them in little groups and he was selling them really, really, really inexpensively. But I have a feeling that most modern painters or young people who don't know, they don't have any idea what this is. They walk by, they see the figures, they don't look real impressive. They go, well, whatever. They don't really know what they're looking at. You look at it like a 1976 warrior back here from Ralpartha. That's one of the first pieces they put out. It's kind of like a paladin with a winged helm and stuff. It's a really beautiful figure. But if you're not familiar with it, and I mean, of course, if you're 20-something, you're likely not going to know a figure that's nearly 50 years old. It's hard to pick out what's there. So most of this is going, and that's kind of why I want to do this little thing where we maybe put a lot of people together and get figures out that we can put up for auction and stuff to maybe make some money for charity, and then in the hands of people who want to collect vintage figures, kind of cool vintage stuff. So here's what I picked up. If you're interested in things, there's a lot more out there. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a monthly. We meet on the second Saturday of every month at HMGSPSW out in Anaheim at our clubhouse. And I think I'm going to go out there and start doing more painting, maybe run some, Dungeon Crawl Classics, maybe do some play testing in my own game system. So if you're interested and you want to come out, I'll start putting more information out when that's there. If you're around, obviously, in Southern California and you want to get together and talk gaming, maybe do some painting, maybe have me show you how to do some stuff if you're new at painting, because it's not daunting. Most people find painting really daunting. And my expression, as I think I've told you, if you spend an hour painting with me, you'll have about 75% of my skill. And from that point on, it's just a matter of how good you want to become. But 75% of my skill is going to allow you to put some really nice tabletop quality figs on the board. And that makes for much improved gaming if you like miniatures, if you're just not playing pen and paper. But it's just things I accumulate. I'm always on the lookout for old stuff. And when I get it for a steal, I just can't leave it. So I pick it up. So there might be lots of opportunities for you to guys get stuff from me. Again, like I said, if it's a situation where if you're one of the top end painters, you want to try some of this stuff, like, Mike Mordor, I sent him a bunch of things. I'd love to see him paint some of this old stuff and get it out there available for players to buy, or get somebody to me that I can add to. So when I maybe get this museum thing going, it'll work out a bit better. Until we have a chance to speak again, paint me, devils, paint, for I hate unpainted lead. Everybody have a great day, and game on.